Chapter 2. Ascending. Chirping birds fluttered by on wings of white and gray. They careened midair to catch the winds and to swirl about on a gusty caress. Nuette paused on the scaffolding's edge, with her arm hooked around one of its supports. She followed the small group of energetic creatures and grinned to see them swoop. Her body leaned out over the streets below, and her gaze fell to the people walking by. They were a crowd of hats from her perspective. Everyone was made up of veils and feathers and brightly colored cones. An uyatable belched its way into the middle of the street. It broke up clusters of pedestrians and left trails of smoke from its forest of smokestacks. Nuette giggled at the sight of the overcrowded transport. Workers were hanging onto every inch of the boxy vehicle, and it swayed with their weight. Several young boys leapt off with packages and went sprinting down side streets. Nuette closed an eye and used her pinky to pretend pat them on their heads. Then she considered the rest of the people. The women with exceptionally pretty dresses got an extra touch of affection, and jaunty guardsmen on Lycaer were given a slap on the back for their good deeds. The six-legged mounts were a little ugly, but she did enjoy the smooth movement of their gait. She observed more guardsmen on the street than usual, but perhaps that was due to the time of day. Usually she was in school when her father went up to fix the rooftop cisterns. Visits to the rooftop were often only to run supper to the late-working plumber. He called her then, glancing over his shoulder from a thin metal ladder.
"Nuette, I told you to stay close."
With a final glance along the street, she waved to the people before hopping to the roof's edge. They never saw her, but she'd feel rude to ignore simple pleasantries. Jogging atop heavy wooden beams, Nuette skipped over an obstacle course of copper tubing, ceramic piping, and thick bundles of cable. She grinned up at her father as she took hold of a ladder rung. "Sorry, I was saying hello to Deutro."
"How kind of you, daughter. And what did the city say in return?"
Nuette clambered upwards with eyebrows hunched. Her cheeks dimpled. "They told me that you're the best plumber in all of Larbane." Deutro helped her swing off the ladder and patted her on the shoulder.
"Oh, did they now? But what of the rest of Galania? Surely I am the best in the whole kingdom."
The buildings were covered in clay tiles, slate shingles, or layered wooden sheets. There was no telling which spots would hold a person's weight, so they made sure to stick to the raised platforms built by workers. "Well," said the girl, "I haven't been anywhere except Larbane, so I don't know. That's a lot of plumbers."
"Well, I believe your reasoning to be acceptable, but I'm almost certain that none have such a fine helper."
They reached an intersection where four rooftops seemed to have collided. Beatrice set down his toe and lifted Nuette by the waist. He helped her onto a footpath that was over his head.
"Now I'm going to hand you the tools. Do not let them fall."
"Right." She shifted around to lie flat on her belly. "Ready!" Splintery edges made her glad of her work garments, thick rawn fabric woven from the plant's husks. They were a rather drab gray and several sizes too large, but that had been solved through rolled-up sleeves and pant legs. Her father lifted his tool bag one-handed, but it took both of hers to keep hold as he climbed onto the higher walkway. With gritted teeth, she strained against the gentle sway of her arms. The tools would survive the short fall without worry, but the bag's compartment of pipe sections would undoubtedly crack. Deutro kneeled beside her, grabbing the tools and the back of her blouse to lift both at once.
"I see that I need to feed you more, We'll have to get you strong like your mother and I."
Nuette snickered as she leaned back on her heels. "What? Dad, don't be delusional. I don't think I'll ever be as strong as you." They continued around a rise of towering brick smokestacks. The soot-covered red grew blacker as it rose into the sky. Deutro positioned himself between the grimy pillars and his daughter.
"Well, you know all things begin small, darling. At your age, I was shorter than you."
He hopped down onto a lower roof and turned to help her down.
"So, with good food and practiced vigor, you'll match us with ease."
She skipped ahead toward a section of broken pipes. "Hey! Is this what we have to do today?" A worn stone figure was resting amid thick shards and scattered tiles. A great barrel cistern fed the pipes, but someone had already shut the valve. Thin little puddles were scattered about the rooftop as testament to the deluge that had been. Beatrice set down his bag and glanced around the roof.
"Oh, strange," he muttered. "There doesn't appear to be anything high enough for such a statue to fall from. How do you think our friend arrived at such an unfortunate landing?"
Nuette shielded her eyes and peered up into the bright blue sky. "Well, it has wings. Maybe stone learned how to fly." He crouched down and rolled the stone carving onto its side. His eyes widened and words sprang to his lips. "Greatness!
Strength in Kalshen!
It was the winged form of the god, Mistress of Fury. The bust had a single eye on its face that still showed some of its original red stain. Of its 4 wings, 2 had broken off and 1 was cracked, on the verge of falling apart. Oh, that's sad. What happened to her? Pietro looked around again, but this time it was with narrowed eyes.
I can only wonder. Perhaps someone dropped her here.
His voice trailed into disquiet.
But why were they carrying an aspect of Kalshen in the first place? Was it discarded in anger?
His daughter hunched down and righted the figure onto its base. She wiggled it to one side of their work area. Well, now we can have Kalshen's mistress watching us work.
I suppose that's true.
He fumbled with a smile on his face.
Thank you, Nuette. Now, let's fix up this mess.
She started gathering pieces of the pipe and clearing away the jumble. Uh-oh. Do we got enough pieces?
Perhaps. We will fix what we can and assess what is needed after. Anything extra can be brought after our midday meal.
They settled around the broken sections and started scraping and chipping to create surfaces for the new bonds. Nuette watched her father glance at the statue again and again, and so much so that his work seemed to crawl forward. He wasn't even giving particularly useful instructions, and so she began to get bored and restless. Beatrice's fingers were straining to wiggle a coupler into place just as she got up to look around. They were in the center of a wide building with only a slight slope to one side. They were too far to see city streets and too low to see over neighboring blocks. It kept the winds down, but that meant summer's rising heat would settle over their heads. It also meant that there was nothing interesting to watch. Even the flits from earlier weren't to be seen, for they kept closer to streets with a keen eye for dropped snacks. Walking around the rooftop's primary cistern, Nuette kept an eye out for handholds usually found on such a structure. Instead, she became distracted by the concrete pump enclosure for the tank. Its access panel was ajar. Crouching down, she noticed that the lock had failed to properly latch. The little door swung open at a touch. Inside, a dynamo was spinning in time to pulses of light from 2 Nitwabi stones. A flywheel was rotating between coils of wire at a low hum, and tubing made a faint gurgle as water was pumped from below. Nuette was satisfied with watching for a moment, but then curiosity provoked another action. She pressed a fingertip against one of the amethyst pieces. It sent a jolt of energy through her arm, and she jerked back with a hiss. "Ow!" she muttered, glancing back to make sure her father hadn't heard. He didn't come running, and so she assumed that all was well. Deciding to avoid playing with something that gave painful shocks, Nuette shut the iron hatch and returned to her primary intent. She looked for, and then spied, the rough notches that made up the cistern's ladder. Wedging in her fingertips, a short climb took her to the structure's top. Her face split into a grin as the city came into better view. Below, Deutro had finished cleaning the break for one pipe and was kneading a thin seam of putty to fit the other for joining. He seemed intent on his task, but then there it was again. His head shifted to look at the aspect's carving. Nuette shrugged. She often saw her parents pay close attention to their god, and especially when they thought she wasn't watching. Their prayers always seemed involved and lengthy until they sounded more like conversations than the rituals of Kalshen. Her idea was that it was a grown-up thing, and so she left the thoughts alone until she grew up. Leaning back, she relaxed against the conical wooden roof and smiled to the sky. With a fingertip, she began tracing the clouds. That kept her interest for a little while, but something began digging into her back. Rolling over, she inspected what appeared to be a hinge. Following the seam, she saw another. "Oh, it's a hatch!" It delighted her to find secret hideaways, and so she carefully crawled to find its means of opening. Though it had once been locked, there was evidence that someone had broken aside the clasp. This was a curiosity, but it did not deter Nuette from her purpose. She slipped her fingers between planks, slowly lifted, and then met the eyes of a rippling version of herself. The water inside had a thin film and darkness below, but there were even darker shapes at the bottom. Throwing the hatch wide, it clattered open and she scooted onto the edge. She was just considering jumping in when her father spoke.
"Nuette! What are you doing up there?"
His voice lost a hint of panic and became stern.
"Come down off of that before you fall in."
"Aw, Dad! But I think I found more statue friends." He turned to look at the one standing beside the walkway, then back up at Nuette.
"Well, you should be very careful and hold still. I will be there in a moment."
A short while later, both of them were staring down over the edge of the opening. "See? They even look the same. I swear they're Kalshen aspects."
You will do no swearing at all, young lady. Pietro reached over the gap and tousled her hair. But this was a clever find. I believe this answers the mystery of our fallen companion to some extent. But now I am curious of the reason.
She hung her head down and let her hair fall forward. It nearly touched the water's surface. Well, someone threw him inside. Can I go down and look? I could climb on that floaty thing. Before he could answer, she kicked off one of her shoes. He slapped his forehead. Nuette, no! His gaze followed as the leather slipper hit below.
All right now, we must get down and go about our day. We mustn't spend any more time on this distraction.
Her cheeks puffed out as she let out a sigh. But what if it means something? Clenching a fist around her blouse, he quickly pulled Nuette over the opening and pressed her to his side.
No, we will go now.
He rolled onto his back and rolled her with him. This set her feet on the edge of the ladder notches.
It's past time for me to finish what I can do, and then you will help your mother with the pottery. I cannot trust you up here if you do not stay by my side.
She clenched her jaw shut. His tone had lost any hint of playfulness, and her lips were screwed up in an attempt to keep in any more protests. Making sure to feel for each foothold, she climbed back down. When Pietro joined her, his eyebrows were no longer hunched atop his eyes, but when she opened her mouth just a hair, he shook his head quickly. No, let us finish this job we are here to do. He glanced at the statue as they marched over to the broken pipes. His jaw muscles flexed, and he shook his head once more.
Wandering off like that. You very nearly had my heart bursting from its cage.
Together, they crouched back down and worked with silent gestures. His were pointed requests for one tool or another. Hers were sagging shoulders and a nose that repeatedly wrinkled.
So, he said after some time in the quiet, I believe I owe you a sandwich.
One of the pipes had been fitted handily, but the other needed another section, the length of Nuette's arm. Her grunted response included rolling eyes. Pietro started gathering up his tools.
And perhaps we can add some wolty cheese for you.
She glanced up through a tumble of gray hair.
But, he started, rubbing his back as he stood, I will need my newest assistant to sing me a song.
He paused with a smile.
To keep up my energy.
Nuette crossed her arms over her chest. She was having little success at hiding the smile creeping out from her scowl.
Perhaps we can even sing together, yes? That might give me an even greater jolt.
He cleared his throat, angling his head toward her and staring expectantly. A grin had snuck between her lips. Catal in the den?
Oh!
He took in a great breath. They started together. What's that flicker? What's that noise? Somebody better wrangle the boys.
There's a little creature with steel claws, and it'll take a bite with crystal jaws.
Nuette started skip-stepping as they made their way back along the walk. A pounce and it runs, then it disappears. What's the one thing that all sloths fear?
They turn with the yelp and quivering stalks, snuffling noses as they cower and balk.
Some ziddle-za-za, some data-loo.
Can't see them, but they can see you.
He kept the tune as Nuette climbed up to a higher level.
Did you see a glimmer? Check in the corner. Did you hear a purr? Oh, you're getting warmer.
Her voice warbled with amusement. Oh no, don't trip, you stumble right through. Now it's got away and you spilled all the stew. She waved her arms with an exaggerated mime of someone falling, and then actually hopped down onto the roof below. Zoo-dee-da-zum-za, ziddle-ziddle-za.
Couldn't keep a catal, so instead we got a slaw.
Pietro balled a fist in front of his chest and held a dramatic pose. His arm wrapped around his bag, much lighter now, as he sang.
It got Bally and Pela as well. Their pants are holy and now they smell.
He sat on the edge of the drop, then scooted off.
Curtains are ruined and dinner's all gone. Ain't seen.
A gunshot echoed from a street to the north. Another followed and ignited a raucous interchange of powder blasts. Men and women yelled and screamed. Someone shouted an order.
West, charge firm!
Nuette started toward a rising cloud of gun smoke. Her mouth was still half open in the process of singing, but the words were missing. Pietro stared, but his teeth were bared. The voice giving orders shouted again.
Catch them! Do not let them escape!
There were several more gunshots. Someone began wailing. A man's voice rose in a high-pitched chant that was wordless and mournful. Turning, Nuette gaped at her father. What's going on? He dropped his bag of tools and rushed forward to pick her up. Cradling his daughter, he turned away from the street's mayhem and started running. "Dad, we're going the wrong way!" Tiles clattered behind them as several people climbed onto the rooftop. Another jumped out from a nearby window and landed with a grunt. What are they running from? Why are we running?"
"Quiet, my darling."
Deutro slid along a tin sheet of roofing and stumbled as it buckled under their combined weight. He winced as his ankle rolled, but leapt down onto a balcony without hesitation. Together, both of them tumbled onto the patio. The street below was strangely empty of the normal city bustle. Instead, a squad of guardsmen stood around a group of kneeling men, women, and children. Deutro clutched his daughter tight. He whispered urgently,
"Are you all right?"
She looked at him with eyes that were wide and unfocused. "What's happening?" The people below had their hands up, and one by one, their palms were being scraped with a wire brush. A man with silver epaulets inspected the result. There was another gunshot, and this time it was from just above the father and daughter. A woman toppled down into the street. There was a sickening crunch. Nuette began to cry. Below, half of the guardsmen turned to the gunfire and the falling body. Pistols and rifles rose smoothly.
"You there! Don't move!"
Deutro froze and wouldn't look at his daughter. She was behind him and pushed herself up onto all fours. She sniffed and began, "I think I—" He reached to one side and pushed her down onto her belly with a hiss.
"Shh! On the balcony! Stand up!" "Nuette,"
whispered Deutro hurriedly.
"My darling, can you get inside? Can you hide for me?"
Turning slowly, Deutro rose up with his hands above his head.
"Please, don't hurt me. Has that building already been searched? Go up with Rachael and bring him down."
Nuette was huddled on the floor of the balcony and trembling with fear. Her eyes were on the back of her father, and her mind was a flurry of questions, but she couldn't voice them. Why was everyone shouting? Why were the guards shooting people? Her father nudged her with the heel of his boot.
"Go!"
Rolling over, she looked at the door. It was closed. Scooting forward, she nudged it. It opened. The dark within frightened her. She turned back toward her father. He was shaking his head. Then he began to chant.
"Grow our roots into the ground, grow to depths where fire is found, split through rock to the molten sea, and hatch an ember to seed the tree. Ruach tak, Kalshen's might, Ruach te, set it free." "Hey!" shouted the leader of the guard. "Shut your mouth!"
"My darling, now!" Nuette's skin prickled and heat ran along her spine. She shivered. She turned back to the dark room beyond the balcony. She crawled inside.